Now we'll take a look at some of White's attacking chances in the structure which arises after a double exchange on d4, so leaving a black pawn on d6 against a white pawn on d4. And what's interesting in this example, I think, is how even in a relatively simplified position, Grischuk is able to create very strong threats. So this is from the European Team Championship of 2011, the match between Russia and Slovenia, where after mainline Ruy Lopez, black selects this Mahler defense. And here Grischuk picks a slightly offbeat variation, so avoiding the, I suppose, the traditional complications of the main line with this pawn sacrifice has been used in a number of games by Shirov and now most particularly Caruana. In set plays knight c3, d6, and now knight d5. So White is simply trading or seeking to trade a pair of knights. So in this position, it should be noted that knight takes e4, while it's possible after queen e2, leads to a very dangerous position for black, in view of the fact that his king is still in the center and he can't afford to open the d file. In particular, Mikhail Chizin gives this variation with bishop f5, d3, knight f6, and now bishop g5, after which black's pawns are going to be spoiled after a capture on f6. So black has a number of options here, but rook b8 is quite sensible. C3, and now after takes, knight e7. This was the move which was prepared by rook b8 because there's no pin on this diagonal. And Grischuk dropped back to b3, castles, and now d4. So in view of the pressure on the e5 pawn, black is forced to make this, I suppose, slight concession by taking on d4 and playing bishop b6. And now h3, simply preventing the bishop from developing, h6, controlling the g5 square, rook e1. And now black played c5, which is quite sensible, attacking the center, bishop e3, defending the d-pawn, bishop b7. Yeah, Mikhail Chizin doesn't like this move so much. He suggests that the bishop should stay on this diagonal, controlling some important squares. So he suggests c4, followed by rook e8 and knight g6. It's also possible, but I think that White should have a stable advantage here in view of his two strong center pawns. But it's true to say that bishop b7 is a move which black needs to be quite careful with in the Ruy Lopez, because while it appears that the bishop is quite active, it's actually relatively difficult to create meaningful threats against the e-pawn. And in the meantime, he does weaken several important squares, so g4, which the queen can come to, or f5, which the knight can attack. So it's definitely a double-edged decision. So Grischuk continued with rook c1. Now bishop takes e4 just really looks quite loose. You could imagine a number of ways for White to play, but I think that simply taking on c5 should be sufficient to create a number of threats. So, for instance, if black were to take back bishop f4, attacking this bishop, attacking the rook, the e7 knight is vulnerable. I don't think that black can go in for that. So instead, black played rook c8 to defend the c5 pawn. But now after takes, black unfortunately can't take with this pawn, as also observed by Mikkel Chisholm, because white takes rook d8 and now knight e5 creates a quick threat against this pawn, and if black came back with rook f8, then knight d7 would win material. So instead of that, black played bishop takes c5, and now we get this typical pawn configuration with a pawn on e4 against a pawn on d6. But it's one in which you can say that white should have the better chances because the black pieces are just misplaced. Often in that pawn structure you'd see this bishop on g7, for instance, on a long diagonal. Here on c5 it's more of a target than anything else. The knight on e7 seems to be quite poorly placed. Normally that would be on f6, attacking the pawn on e4. The bishop on b7 we've already talked about, that while it attacks the e-pawn, it's also vulnerable itself, or rather leaves vulnerable squares on the king side. So overall this is a position which is quite dangerous for black, and Grischuk manages to demonstrate that very effectively. So he starts with knight h4. Mikkel Chisholm recommends bishop d4, but I quite like Grischuk's plan of just bringing all of his pieces to the king side very quickly. And now black kind of missed his chance with queen b6. He should really start reducing material with bishop takes e3. Rook takes e3, takes, and d5, as given by Mikkel Chisholm, and he has reasonably good chances to equalize here. After queen b6, now after rook c3, it turns out that black isn't able to effect as many exchanges as he wants, because if he were to take, this rook would take where the rooks are very strong, and this rook can also come to attack the king side. So after this, white just has an enduring attack. So rook cd8, queen h5, taking advantage of the position of the knight on e7, that even this very aggressive square is available. Bishop takes e3, takes, and d5, but this is just too late. Rook g3, and white is amassing an overwhelming attacking position on the king side. All of his pieces are in play. Whereas black, well, the queen at least defends laterally, but this bishop isn't well placed, and the knight is also, you could say, a target. So black stepped off the dangerous g file, and now with the opening of lines, the white knight seizes the f5 square, which is so often a crucial square in this type of position. And again, we can see that we have a pawn-free center with complete clarity here, where white has an overwhelming advantage in piece activity, which proves to be decisive. So black tried bringing this knight back to g6, but now knight h4, rook d6, and bishop takes f7, just undermining the knight and winning material. And now after takes, knight f8 check. These tactics aren't particularly difficult for a player of Grischuk's caliber, but the counter-attack on f2 is obviously insufficient. And now after g5, just trying to avoid the threats on g7, Grischuk is able to completely destroy the black kingside pawn defenses. And after queen h5 check, rook h6, queen takes g5, black resigned because of inevitable mate. So I think not the most theoretical game, but all the more interesting for it. And very instructive how Grischuk manages, even with relatively few pieces on the board, to generate such a dangerous kingside attack.